The moon hung low over the whispering woods, its silver light fracturing through the canopy like shattered glass, casting elongated shadows that twisted like forgotten secrets. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and wild pine, undercut by something sharper, fear perhaps, or the metallic tang of blood long dried. Leaves rustled in a breeze that carried whispers, not of wind, but of ancient watchers hidden in the bark and roots. Elara's breath came in shallow bursts as she clutched the small bundle to her chest, her bare feet sinking into the mossy undergrowth, each step a silent prayer against the crunch of twigs. She had run for what felt like lifetimes, though the night was young. The pack's howls echoed faintly behind her, a chorus of betrayal that clawed at her resolve. Her son, little Kai, stirred in her arms, his tiny fists balled against the rough wool of her cloak. He was warm, too warm, a spark of wildness already flickering in his veins despite his tender age of 3 summers. She pressed her lips to his fevered forehead, tasting salt and the faint, musky hint of fur that shouldn't belong to a child, not yet shifted. "Hush, my rogue pup," she murmured, her voice a threadbare veil over the terror gnawing at her heart. "Mama's got you. The woods will hide us." The forest was no gentle guardian. Thorns snagged at her skirts, drawing thin lines of blood that mingled with the dew. Elara's muscles burned, her lungs aching from the flight, but she pushed deeper into the gloom, where the trees grew denser, their branches interlocking like the bars of a cage. She had been one of them once, a beta in the Silverfang pack, bound by loyalty and the moon's inexorable pull. But Kai's birth had changed everything. He wasn't like the others. Born under a rogue moon, they called it, when the eclipses twisted fates. His eyes, even as an infant, had gleamed with an unnatural gold, and his cries had summoned shadows that danced like wolves at play. The pack elders had seen it as a curse. "A tainted bloodline," they snarled, their fangs bared in the great hall's firelight. "He'll bring ruin to us all." Elara had fought then, her own claws extending in a futile rage, but they outnumbered her. She fled with Kai swaddled against her, the Alpha's roar shaking the earth as she vanished into the night. Now the woods were her only ally, vast and unforgiving, stretching toward the forbidden fringes, where rogue shifters whispered of freedom and madness. A root caught her ankle, sending her stumbling into a clearing ringed by ancient oaks. Their trunks were etched with runes, faded symbols of old magic that hummed faintly in her blood. Elara dropped to her knees, cradling Kai as he whimpered, his small body trembling. The moon's gaze pierced the leaves above, bathing them in its cold embrace. She rocked him gently, her fingers tracing the soft curve of his ear, already pointed like a pup's. "We're safe here," she lied to the night, though her heightened senses screamed otherwise. The air shifted, carrying a new scent, musk and authority like storm clouds gathering over a throne. In the distance, a low growl rumbled, not from her pursuers, but something greater. Elara's heart stuttered. She knew that sound. Legend spoke of him, the Alpha King, ruler of the fractured packs, a shadow who united what others tore asunder. Thorn Blackthorn, they called him, his name a blade in the tongues of foes. He was no mere alpha. Whispers said he bore the mark of the first wolf, a beast who could command the moon itself. Why would he venture into these rogue lands? Elara's mind raced, piecing together fragments from old tales, rumors of a hunt for the lost bloodlines, to purge or claim them for his eternal reign. Kai's eyes fluttered open, locking onto hers with that piercing gold. "Mama, hungry," he whispered, his voice a pup's whine laced with something feral. She fumbled in her satchel, pulling out a strip of dried venison, pressing it to his lips. As he chewed, a strange warmth bloomed in the air around them, the runes on the oaks glowing faintly. Kai's hand reached out, touching the bark, and for a heartbeat the tree seemed to lean closer as if listening. Elara froze, the power in him. It was awakening, drawn by the moon's pull. She had hidden it, smothered it with herbs and lies, but the woods knew. They always did. A twig snapped nearby, too deliberate to be chance. Her wolf surged within, hackles rising, but she forced it down. Fight now, and she'd doom them both. Instead, she gathered Kai and slipped behind a fallen log, its mossy decay cloaking her scent like a shroud. The underbrush parted, and he emerged, a silhouette carved from midnight, broad-shouldered and unyielding. Thorn's eyes, amber flames in the dark, scanned the clearing with predatory precision. His fur-trimmed cloak billowed like wings, and the air thickened with his presence. A dominance that pressed against Elara's skin like invisible chains. He moved with the grace of a hunter-born, nostrils flaring as he inhaled the night's secrets. "I smell you," he rumbled, his voice deep as thunder rolling through valleys. Fear and something wilder. Elara's breath hitched, her hand over Kai's mouth to stifle his soft gasp. The Alpha King's gaze swept the shadows, lingering on the glowing runes. A faint smile curved his lips, not of warmth, but recognition. "The rogue pup," he murmured, as if to the moon itself. "The one they say will shatter packs or forge them anew." Panic clawed at her throat. How did he know? The pack's whispers must have reached even his distant throne. She pressed deeper into the log's embrace, the rough bark biting into her back, her mind a whirlwind of escape routes vanishing like mist. Kai squirmed, his tiny claws pricking her skin, and in that moment a spark leaped from his fingers to the earth, a flicker of shadow that danced briefly before the Alpha's eyes snapped toward it. There was no running now. The woods held its breath, the moon watched impassively, and Elara felt the threads of destiny tightening around her hidden world. She had fled one cage, only to stumble into the jaws of a king. But for her pup, she would bare her teeth and fight the coming storm. Thorn's boots crunched softly against the fallen leaves, each step a deliberate echo in the charged silence of the clearing. The air grew heavier, laced with the earthy musk of his presence, a scent that wrapped around Elara like vines, claiming an ancient ruin. She could feel it seeping into her pores, stirring the wolf within her to both submission and defiance, a primal tug that made her claws itch beneath her nails. Kai's small body tensed against her, his breath hot and ragged against her collarbone, the faint tremor of his emerging power humming like a distant storm. The Alpha King paused at the edge of the runes, his massive frame silhouetted against the moon's fractured glow. Shadows clung to him, not as foes, but as loyal hounds curling at his heels. He tilted his head, nostrils flaring wider, drawing in the mingled sense of fear sweat, child innocence, and that elusive wildness that set her son's blood apart. "Come out," he commanded, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the ground, resonating in Elara's bones like the moon's own call to shift. It wasn't a request. It was the inexorable pull of an Alpha's will, bending the night to his desire. Elara's heart pounded a frantic rhythm, her mind a whirlwind of half-formed plans. Flee deeper into the thorns, invoke the old runes for a veil of illusion, or bare her throat in false surrender to buy time. But Kai's golden eyes met hers in the dimness, wide with a mix of terror and curiosity, and she knew surrender was no option, not for him. She shifted slightly, the log's damp moss cool against her skin, and whispered into his ear, "Stay still, my love. Mama will make this right." Her free hand slipped to the dagger hidden in her boot, its hilt worn smooth from years of quiet threats in the pack's shadowed corners. Thorn's gaze sharpened, locking onto their hiding spot with unerring precision. The spark from Kai had betrayed them, a fleeting betrayal of the boy's untamed gift. He took another step, the runes beneath his feet pulsing faintly, as if the ancient oaks themselves recoiled from his approach, or perhaps acknowledged his dominion. "I am not your hunter tonight," he said, softer now, though the words carried the weight of iron chains. "The silver fangs send their curs after blood, but I seek understanding. The rogue pup's light calls to the old blood. Show yourself, and no harm will come." Lies, Elara thought, her lips curling in silent scorn. Kings like him spoke of understanding as wolves spoke of mercy, only to bare fangs when the moon rose high. Yet something in his tone snagged at her, a thread of genuine intrigue woven through the command. She had heard the tales, Thorn Blackthorn, forged in the wars that shattered the great packs, his heart scarred by losses that echoed her own hidden wounds. But empathy was a luxury for the powerful. For rogues like her, it was a trap. Kai whimpered, a sound too raw, too pup-like, and it shattered the fragile quiet. Thorn's head snapped toward them, and in a blur of motion he vaulted the log, landing with predatory grace mere feet away. Up close, he was a storm incarnate, tall as an ancient pine, his dark hair falling in wild waves to shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of fractured kingdoms. Scars etched his jaw and arms, visible even in the cloak's folds, silvery lines that told of battles with beasts both furred and spectral. His amber eyes burned into hers, not with rage, but a piercing curiosity that stripped her bare. Elara surged to her feet, clutching Kai behind her, the dagger now in hand, its blade catching the moonlight like a sliver of ice. "Stay back," she snarled, her voice cracking with the strain of holding her wolf at bay. The shift clawed at her edges, fur prickling beneath her skin, but she forced it down, her body a trembling barrier between king and child. The air crackled with tension, the scent of impending rain mingling with the sharp tang of her own adrenaline. Thorn raised a hand, palm open, though his stance remained coiled, ready to strike. "A mother's fire," he murmured, his gaze flicking to the boy peeking from her skirts. Kai's eyes glowed brighter now, reflecting the moon's silver, and a soft growl escaped his throat, not fear, but instinct, as shadows began to coil at his feet like playful smoke. Thorn's breath caught, a rare flicker of awe crossing his features. By the first wolf, he is the one, the Eclipse-born, wielder of the veil between worlds. Elara's grip tightened on the dagger, her mind reeling. How could he know so much? The elders had whispered of such a child in hushed fears, a harbinger who could unravel the pack's fragile peace or mend it with forbidden magic. But to hear it from the Alpha King's lips, as if it were prophecy fulfilled, chilled her deeper than the night. "He's no weapon for your wars," she spat, stepping forward, her bare feet sinking into the cool earth. Thorns from earlier snagged her hem, drawing fresh beads of blood that scented the air with coppery sweetness. "Leave us, or I'll carve your claim from your hide." A low chuckle rumbled from Thorn's chest, not mocking, but laced with a melancholy that mirrored her own solitude. He didn't advance, but his presence pressed closer, an invisible force that made the trees lean in, listening. "Wars have claimed enough of me, she-wolf. I hunt not to destroy, but to protect what the moon has marked." His eyes softened as they settled on Kai, who had emerged fully now, tiny hand outstretched toward the gathering shadows. The boy tilted his head, mimicking the king's stance, and for a heartbeat the air shimmered, a bridge forming between them, pup and sovereign, wild magic humming like a lullaby. Elara's resolve wavered, the dagger trembling in her grasp. In that moment she saw not a conqueror, but a man haunted by the same inexorable pull, the destiny that bound them all in fur and fang. Kai's shadows danced higher, brushing Thorn's boot, and the king knelt slowly, extending a scarred hand. "Little one," he whispered, voice rough with unspoken longing, "show me your light." The boy hesitated, glancing at Elara, his golden eyes pleading. She wanted to scream, to flee into the endless woods where no king could follow. But the runes glowed brighter, the moon bore witness, and deep in her soul the wolf whispered of alliances forged in shadow. With a shuddering breath she lowered the blade, the weight of choice settling like dew on her lashes. The night held them suspended, on the precipice of revelation, as Kai's small fingers reached out, bridging the chasm between hunted and hunter. Yet even as hope flickered, faint as a dying ember, Elara sensed the storm gathering beyond the trees, the distant howls of her former pack closing in, drawn by the rogue's awakening. Thorn's head lifted, ears pricking, and his eyes met hers with a shared resolve. "They come," he growled, rising to his full height. "Run with me or fall alone." The choice tore at her, a wound deeper than any claw, but for Kai's sake, she nodded, gathering her pup into her arms as the first raindrops kissed the leaves. The woods whispered secrets of paths untrodden, and together they plunged into the gloom, the Alpha King's shadow merging with theirs in a fragile pact against the encroaching dawn. Rain lashed the whispering woods like the tears of forgotten gods, turning the earth into a slick mire that sucked at their footsteps with greedy insistence. Elara's arms burned from clutching Kai close, his small body a furnace against the chill seeping through her sodden cloak. The fabric clung to her skin like a second hide, heavy with water and the metallic bite of fear sweat. Thorn moved ahead, a dark spectre cutting through the underbrush with effortless power, his broad back a shield against the storm's fury. Branches whipped at her face, drawing stinging lines that mingled with the downpour, but she pressed on, her wolf's instincts urging her deeper into the labyrinth of thorns and ancient roots. The howls behind them pierced the thunder's roar, a savage symphony of the Silverfang pack, closing the distance with relentless hunger. Elara's heart twisted at the sound. Echoes of a life she had once cherished, now warped into pursuit. She glanced at Thorn's profile, illuminated fleetingly by a bolt of lightning that split the sky like a claw mark. His jaw was set, amber eyes narrowed against the gale, but beneath the king's unyielding mask, she glimpsed the weight of isolation, a mirror to her own exiled soul. Why had he chosen to run with them? Not out of pity, she knew. Alphas like him bent the world to their will, yet here he was. Forgoing his throne's safety for a rogue's desperate flight, Kai stirred in her grasp, his golden eyes flickering open amid the chaos. "Mama, shadows dance," he murmured, voice muffled by the rain but laced with that eerie wonder. Even in the storm, his power hummed, tendrils of darkness weaving through the droplets like living ink, brushing against Thorn's trailing cloak. The king glanced back, a nod of acknowledgement passing between them, silent, charged with the fragile thread of trust. Elara's breath caught. In Kai's gaze, she saw not just her pup, but a force unraveling the veils of fate, pulling this mighty stranger into their orbit. They plunged into a denser thicket, where the trees huddled like conspirators, their barks slick and etched with glowing veins of old magic. The air grew thicker here, scented with wet moss and the faint, acrid tang of phosphorus from lightning-struck earth. Thorn halted abruptly at a narrow ravine, its edges jagged with exposed roots that clawed at the sky. Below, a swollen stream roared, frothing white against boulders worn smooth by centuries of rage. "This way," he growled over the wind, his voice an anchor in the tumult. He leaped first, landing with a splash that sent water arcing like shattered stars, then turned to offer his hand. Elara hesitated, the dagger's ghost still heavy in her memory. Trust was a luxury eroded by betrayal, yet the howls grew louder, vibrating through her bones like a death knell. With a sharp nod, she shifted Kai to one arm and grasped Thorn's extended palm. His touch was calloused fire, strong enough to crush stone, yet he pulled her down with surprising gentleness, his other arm steadying her waist as her feet hit the slippery bank. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked, hers stormy grey, his molten gold, and in that contact something stirred, a forbidden spark amid the deluge. Not love, not yet, but recognition, two souls scarred by the moon's cruel whims, bound now in this midnight pact. They forded the stream together, the icy water biting into Elara's legs like fangs, numbing her to the marrow. Kai whimpered, clinging tighter, his tiny claws pricking her shoulder through the wool. On the far side, Thorn led them up a steeper incline, his breath steady despite the exertion, while Elara's lungs laboured, each gasp tasting of river mud and pine sap. The rain eased to a persistent drizzle, unveiling the woods in ghostly hues, but the shadows lengthened, coiling unnaturally at Kai's feet. The boy giggled softly, a sound like breaking glass in the gloom, and Elara's heart clenched. His gift was no mere quirk. It was a beacon, drawing peril as surely as the moon drew tides. As they crested the rise, the forest opened into a hidden glade, ringed by colossal stones etched with faded wolf runes, relics of the first pack, guardians against intruders. The air hummed here, charged with residual magic that prickled Elara's skin like static fur. Thorn scanned the perimeter, nostrils flaring, then gestured to a cluster of boulders forming a natural alcove. "Rest here. The stones will mask our scent." He knelt, shrugging off his cloak to wrap around Kai, the fur lining soft against the child's chilled form. Elara sank beside them, her body a map of aches, watching as Thorn coaxed a small fire from damp tinder, his hands moving with ritual precision, sparks leaping like defiant stars. In the fire's warming glow, shadows played across Thorn's face, deepening the scars that told tales of battles lost and won. "Why us?" Elara finally whispered, her voice raw, as Kai nestled against the king's side, eyes heavy with exhaustion. The howls had faded, muffled by the ravine's roar, granting a fragile respite. Thorn stared into the flames, the light dancing in his eyes like captive moons. "The eclipse-born. I've waited lifetimes for such a sign. The pack's fracture under weak blood, but he glanced at Kai, voice softening to a rumble. "He carries the veil's power, shadows that bind, not break. I was like him once, a pup marked by the rogue moon, hunted by my own, until I claimed the throne with blood and shadow." Elara's breath hitched, a veil lifting in her mind. The legends painted him as a tyrant, but this confession peeled back the myth, revealing a man forged in the same fires of rejection. Her hand hovered near Kai's sleeping form, brushing Thorn's arm inadvertently. The contact sent a shiver through her, not of cold, but awakening, a tenderness she had buried deep, sacrificed to survival. "They'll never stop," she said, voice trembling with the weight of truth. "The elders see him as doom. And they'll say you've stolen their curse." Thorn's gaze met hers, intense and unblinking, the fire crackling between them like unspoken promises. "Let them come. I've faced worse than curs." He reached out, his fingers tracing the thorn scratches on her cheek with feather-light care, wiping away a rain-mingled tear. The touch lingered, stirring the wolf within her to a low, yearning growl, impossible longing amid the ruins of their worlds. For a moment, the glade held only them, mother, pup, and king, bound by destiny's silken noose. But the respite shattered as a guttural snarl echoed from the tree line. Shadows twisted unnaturally, Kai's dormant power flaring in response, coiling around the stones like protective serpents. Thorn rose, claws extending with a metallic rasp, his form rippling with the promise of shift. Elara scooped Kai into her arms, the boy's eyes snapping open, gold blazing. The pursuers had bridged the ravine. 3 silver-fang betas, their fur matted and eyes wild with pack frenzy, bursting into the glade like avenging spectres. The first lunged at Thorn, jaws snapping, but the king met him mid-air, a blur of fang and fury. They crashed against a runestone, the impact reverberating like thunder, sparks of ancient magic igniting in the air. Elara backed toward the alcove, dagger drawn once more, her heart a war drum as Kai's shadows surged, wrapping around her legs like loyal hounds. The second beta circled her, lips curling in recognition. "Traitor bitch," he spat, voice gravelly through shifted jaws. "The pup's curse ends tonight." She bared her teeth, the shift surging hot through her veins, fur prickling her arms. "Touch him, and I'll rip your throat." As he pounced, Kai's power erupted, a veil of darkness swallowing the beta whole, his howl twisting into a muffled scream before silence fell. Elara stared, awe and terror mingling. Her son had defended them, his gift no longer hidden but blooming in violence and protection. Thorn dispatched the third with a savage twist, blood spraying the stones like sacrificial ink, then turned to her, chest heaving, eyes alight with fierce pride. "The veil awakens," he breathed, stepping close, his bloodied hand cupping her face. In that gaze, Elara saw the precipice, alliance deepening to something raw, a love impossible yet inevitable, forged in the storm's aftermath. The distant howls renewed, fainter but unrelenting, as rain whispered promises of trials yet to come. They gathered Kai, the glade's magic fading like a sigh, and slipped back into the woods, three shadows entwined, chasing the moon's elusive light toward an uncertain dawn. The mist clung to the whispering woods like a lover's reluctant farewell, veiling the path in gossamer threads that muffled the crunch of leaves underfoot. Dawn's first blush bled through the canopy, painting the world in bruised purples and hesitant golds, but the air remained heavy with the night's residue, damp fur, spilled blood, and the acrid smoke of the dying fire. Elara's legs trembled with exhaustion, each step a negotiation with the mud that sucked at her boots like greedy mouths. Kai dozed against her shoulder, his small chest rising and falling in rhythmic innocence, though faint wisps of shadow curled from his fingertips, trailing like forgotten dreams. Thorn led the way, his silhouette a steadfast anchor amid the swirling fog, but even his stride carried the subtle hitch of wounds freshly earned. The beta's blood still flecked his cloak, darkening the fur to a somber rust, and Elara caught the faint hitch in his breath, masked by the resolute set of his shoulders. She had seen kings fall in the pack's tails, brought low by pride or blade, yet here he pressed on, not for glory, but for them, a rogue mother and her cursed pup. The thought stirred something warm and treacherous in her chest, a flicker against the cold knot of doubt that had rooted there since the glade's violence. The howls echoed sporadically now, fragmented by the ravines and thickets, but no less insistent, a relentless tide eroding their fragile sanctuary. Elara's wolf senses prickled, picking up the undercurrent of more than pursuit, the pack's elders stirring their frenzy with whispers of abomination, of a king's betrayal in aiding the tainted. She glanced back, the mist swallowing the glade like a secret buried deep, and wondered if the runes there would whisper of their passage, or if the stones wept for the blood spilled upon them. Thorn slowed at a cluster of twisted elders, their branches gnarled like the claws of slumbering beasts, and pressed a hand to one trunk. The bark yielded slightly under his palm, warm as living flesh, and a low hum resonated through the ground, vibrating up Elara's spine. "Old allies," he murmured, voice gravel-rough from the night's exertions. "The first pack's watchers. They'll guide us to the hollow vein, a vein of earth magic hidden from all but the marked." His amber eyes met hers, holding a depth that spoke of secrets heavier than crowns. "Kai's power calls to it, and yours. It stirs now, doesn't it?" She swallowed, the words catching like thorns in her throat. Her own shift had always been tame, a beta's dutiful change under the moon's command, But since Kai's birth, fragments of wildness had seeped into her blood, shadows that tugged at the edges of her vision, urging her towards something untamed. In the glade, when her son's veil had swallowed the beta, she had felt it echo in her veins, a dark harmony that both terrified and exhilarated. "It's not mine to claim," she whispered, shifting Kai's weight, his warmth seeping through her like a balm. "I'm no queen of veils, just a mother hiding what's hers." Thorn's gaze softened, the scars on his face catching the faint light like silver rivers on stone. He stepped closer, the space between them charged with the scent of rain-washed pine and his own musk, a blend that made her pulse quicken despite the peril. "Hiding forged you stronger than any throne," he said, his hand brushing her arm, light as a breath, yet igniting sparks beneath her skin. "I hid once too, a pup rogue, shadows my only kin, until I learned to wield them as weapons and shields." His fingers lingered, tracing the curve of her elbow, and in that touch, Elara glimpsed the boy he had been. Alone, hunted, the moon's eclipse branding him with isolation's cruel kiss. Kai stirred, his golden eyes fluttering open, locking onto Thorn with unchildlike intensity. "King man. Play shadows?" The boy's voice was a soft whine, laced with that feral lilt, and as he extended a chubby hand, tendrils of darkness uncoiled from the earth, weaving playful patterns around Thorn's boots like eager hounds. The king knelt, a rare smile cracking his stern facade, and let the shadows lap at his fingers. They responded to him too, bending, twisting into shapes of wolves and stars, a silent communion that made Elara's breath hitch. Father and son, she thought unbidden, the image piercing her like a fang, stirring a longing she dared not name. Love in their world was a chain, binding fates to ruin. Yet here it bloomed fragile and fierce, defying the storm. The moment shattered as a fresh howl sliced the mist, closer now, laced with the guttural edge of shifted rage. Thorn rose swiftly, his form rippling with restrained power, claws glinting as they extended. "They've scented the blood trail," he growled, scanning the fog-shrouded trees. "The hollow is near, but we must run." He scooped Kai from her arms with effortless strength, the boy nestling against his chest without protest, trusting in a way that twisted Elara's heart. She followed, dagger in hand once more, the blade's weight a cold comfort as they darted through the elder's embrace. The woods narrowed into a throat of stone and root, the air growing thicker, laced with the mineral tang of underground rivers and the faint electric buzz of latent magic. Vines snaked across their path, parting at Thorn's approach as if recognizing kin. But Thorn still lashed at Elara's legs, drawing beads of blood that scented the air with coppery invitation. Her lungs burned, the mist coating her throat like ash, but she pushed harder, driven by the vision of Kai safe, of a life beyond endless flight. They burst into the hollow vein, a cavernous depression where the earth yawned open, revealing a glowing chasm veined with luminescent quartz that pulsed like a heartbeat. The air hummed with power, shadows dancing along the walls in eternal twilight, and Elara felt it pull at her core, awakening the dormant wildness in her blood. Kai squealed in delight from Thorn's arms, his shadows surging forth to mingle with the cavern's own, creating a tapestry of darkness alive with whispers. But triumph curdled as figures emerged from the mist at the cavern's rim. 5 Silver-Fang warriors, led by the pack's beta enforcer, his fur streaked with silver and eyes burning with zealous fire. "The king consorts with curs," he bellowed, voice echoing off the stones like a war cry. They leaped down, claws scraping rock, a pack of vengeance incarnate. Thorn set Kai down gently behind a quartz outcrop, his body shifting in a fluid ripple. Fur erupting, muscles coiling into the massive form of his wolf, midnight black with amber eyes blazing. Elara's own change tore through her. Bones cracking and reforming in a blaze of agony and release, her grey pelt shimmering as shadows wove into it like living armor. She lunged beside him, a mother's fury fueling her snarls as the first warrior collided with Thorn in a clash of fangs and thunder. The battle raged in the hollow's glow, shadows whipping like lashes under Kai's instinctive command, ensnaring legs and throats. Elara tore into a flank, tasting hot blood and the salt of desperation, her heart a storm of protection and burgeoning alliance. Thorn fought like a tempest, his roars shaking the quartz, but a deep gash opened on his side from a traitorous swipe, blood spilling to mingle with the chasm's light. In the fray's heart, Elara locked eyes with Thorn across the melee, his gaze fierce, holding not just command, but a plea. For her, for them, for the family, fate had woven from exile's threads. Kai's power crested, a veil of darkness swallowing two foes whole, their howls fading into silence. The remaining warriors faltered, then fled into the mist, but the cost lingered in the air, wounds that would scar, trust that deepened with every shared breath. As the echoes died, Elara shifted back, collapsing beside Thorn, her hands pressing against his bleeding side. Kai crawled to them, shadows curling protectively, and in that triad, amid the hollow's humming embrace, she felt the first stirrings of home, not a cage, but a hearth forged in shadow and sacrifice. The distant howls promised more storms, but for now the veins' light cradled them, whispering of powers awakening and bonds unbreakable. The hollow veins' glow pulsed like a wounded heart, casting ethereal veins of light across the cavern's jagged walls, where shadows writhed in silent communion. The air hung thick with the coppery reek of blood and the sharp ozone tang of unleashed magic, mingling with the damp stone's chill that seeped into bones like regret. Elara's hands trembled as she pressed a torn strip of her cloak against Thorn's side, the fabric soaking through with crimson warmth that belied the king's stoic silence. His breath came in measured rasps, each one a labored echo against the quartz's hum, but his amber eyes held hers with unyielding fire, refusing to yield to the pain, etching deeper lines into his scarred face. Kai huddled close, his small form wedged between them, golden eyes wide and flickering as shadows coiled around his legs like protective vines. The boy's power lingered in the air, a tangible veil that shimmered faintly, having swallowed the warrior's cries into oblivion. Yet exhaustion tugged at him, his tiny claws retracting as he leaned against Thorn's thigh, the king's blood staining his cheek like a warrior's first mark. Elara's wolf whimpered inwardly, torn between the urge to lick her pup clean and the raw ache of tending the man who had become their unlikely shield. "Hold still," she murmured, her voice a fragile thread woven through the cavern's whispers. "The veins' light will mend what claws can't." Thorn's hand covered hers, calloused fingers intertwining with a gentleness that belied his strength, the contact sending a jolt through her, a spark of shadow and warmth that stirred the wildness in her blood. "I've borne worse," he rumbled, though the words carried a husky edge, his gaze tracing the fresh gashes on her arms, souvenirs from the fray. The mist from the woods had followed them here, curling at the cavern's edges like spectral hounds, but within this sanctum the world narrowed to the three of them. A triad forged in exile's crucible, where solitude cracked open to reveal fragile bonds. She tore her eyes away, focusing on the wound, the flesh knitting slowly under the quartz's glow, threads of darkness weaving in like Kai's instinctive magic. It was no full healing. The gash would scar, a new etch upon his tapestry of battles, but it bought time. Time they desperately needed, for the distant howls had not ceased. They swelled now, a chorus laced with the Elder's incantations, drawing the pack like moths to the rogue moon's flame. Elara's heart clenched, the weight of destiny pressing down, a crown she never sought. She had hidden Kai to spare him the pack's judgments, the curse of his eclipse-born gift, but now it bloomed unchecked, pulling kings and curs alike into its orbit. "Rise, little one," Thorn said softly, shifting despite the pain to lift Kai onto his lap. The boy nuzzled closer, his shadows dancing tentatively, brushing Thorn's chest like curious pups. For a moment, the cavern's hum softened, as if the earth itself approved, the luminescent veins brightening in response. Elara watched, transfixed, as Thorn murmured ancient words, fragments of the first pack's lore, guiding Kai's tendrils into shapes of wolves at play, their forms flickering in the light. The king's face softened, the mask of sovereignty slipping to reveal a longing etched deep, a fatherhood denied by fate's cruel twist. "Your veil is a bridge, not a curse," he whispered to the child. "It binds the lost, mends what the moon has torn." Kai's laughter echoed, a pure chime amid the gloom, but Elara felt the undercurrent, a power too vast for his tender frame, stirring echoes in her own veins. Her shadows had always been whispers, suppressed by beta loyalty, but now they surged, coiling around her fingers unbidden, responding to her son's call. She flexed her hand, the darkness cool and alive, tasting of midnight winds and hidden freedoms. Fear warred with exhilaration. This awakening was no gift, but a double-edged fang, promising strength at the cost of her carefully guarded isolation. The fragile piece shattered as the cavern trembled, dust sifting from the ceiling like falling stars. The howls crescendoed, vibrating through the stone, and figures silhouetted against the entrance, more silver fangs, a dozen strong, their eyes gleaming with fanatic zeal. At their forefront loomed Elder Garrick, his silvered fur rippling over a frame bent by age yet unbowed by rage, claws extended like judgment's talons. "Traitor king!" he snarled, voice booming off the walls. Laced with the pack's collective fury, "You harbor the abomination, defiling the bloodlines for your shadowed throne. The Eclipse pup dies tonight, and you with him." Thorn surged to his feet. Kai clutched protectively, his wound protesting with a fresh seep of blood that scented the air sharply. Elara rose beside him, her form rippling into partial shift, fur sprouting along her arms, claws lengthening as shadows armored her like liquid night. The veins' magic amplified them, quartz pulsing in rhythm with their heartbeats, but the elders chanted now, countering with runes of binding that dimmed the glow, forcing the darkness to retreat. "You chase ghosts of fear," Thorn roared, his voice a thunderclap that shook loose pebbles. "The boy is the future you dread, the one to unite, not shatter." Garrick laughed, a guttural bark, and his pack lunged, a wave of fangs and fury crashing into the hollow. Thorn met them head-on, his massive wolf form erupting in a blur of midnight pelt. Kai handed to Elara in a seamless pass. She backed toward the chasm's edge, dagger forgotten in the surge of her awakening power, shadows flaring to ensnare the nearest attackers. One beta broke through, jaws snapping toward Kai, but Elara's veil lashed out, a whip of darkness that coiled around his throat, squeezing until his eyes bulged, and he crumpled lifeless. Pain lanced through her as another clawed her side, hot and tearing, but she fought on, Kai's small hands gripping her fur, his power merging with hers in a symphony of shadow. Thorn battled at the center, a whirlwind of savagery, dispatching two with brutal efficiency, but Garrick circled him cunning and relentless, his fangs finding purchase on the king's flank. Blood sprayed, mingling with the quartz light in crimson arcs, and Thorn staggered, a growl of agony escaping as the elder's claws raked deep. In that heartbeat of vulnerability, Elara felt the world fracture. Sacrifice burned in her chest, her pup's life, the king's alliance, her own hidden self, all teetering on the precipice. With a cry that echoed the moon's lament, she channeled the veins' power through Kai, their shadows erupting in a cataclysmic wave. It swallowed Garrick mid-leap. The elders howl, twisting into silence as the veil claimed him, dragging his form into ethereal depths. The remaining pack faltered, terror rippling through their ranks, and fled into the mist, leaving the cavern a battlefield of echoes and blood. Thorn collapsed to one knee, shifting back, his chest heaving as Elara rushed to him, Kai between them. She tore more cloth for his wounds, tears blurring the glowing veins, the cost etching into her soul, a piece of her innocence lost to the violence that birthed their strength. "We can't stay," she whispered, voice breaking, as the quartz dimmed, the magic spent. Thorn nodded, pulling her close, his bloodied hand cradling Kai's head, their triad a bastion against the encroaching howls. Yet in the aftermath, as shadows settled like a shroud, Elara glimpsed the transformation, her power no longer repressed, but a fierce guardian, mirroring the king's own scarred resilience. Love's impossible bloom stirred amid the ruin, tender, defiant, a promise of rebirth forged in sacrifice. The hollow whispered of paths leading deeper toward the pack's heart, where final reckonings awaited under the rising sun. They rose together, wounds throbbing like heartbeats, stepping into the dawn's fragile light, bound by destiny's unyielding thread. The dawn's tentative light filtered through the hollow veins' fractured ceiling, painting the cavern in hues of rose and ash, as if the sun itself mourned the night's toll. The quartz veins flickered weakly now, their luminescent pulse fading like a heartbeat surrendering to exhaustion, leaving the air heavy with the mingled scents of blood-soaked stone and smouldering shadows. Elara's fingers, slick with Thorn's blood, trembled as she bound the deepest gash along his ribs, the fabric from her cloak twisting into a makeshift bandage that soaked through almost immediately. Each knot she tied felt like sealing a vow, fragile, inevitable, her own wounds throbbing in echo, shallow furrows across her arms that wept crimson trails down to her elbows. Kai pressed against her side, his small face streaked with dirt and drying tears, golden eyes dimmed but watchful, the shadows at his feet curling inward like wounded creatures seeking solace. The boy's power had crested in the battle's fury, a veil that devoured elder and warrior alike, but now it ebbed, leaving him pale and shivering, his tiny claws retracted into soft human hands. Elara pulled him closer, inhaling the faint, milky scent of his skin, beneath the copper tang of violence, her wolf's instincts a low whine in her chest. They had won this skirmish, scattering the silver fangs into the mist-shrouded woods, but victory tasted of ash. Garrick's absence echoed louder than his snarls, a void that promised retribution from the pack's shattered heart. Thorn's breath rattled softly, his massive frame slumped against the cavern wall, the scars of old battles mingling with fresh ones in a map of endurance. He reached out, his hand finding hers atop the bandage, fingers interlacing with a strength that belied the pain etching his features. "The vein has given what it can," he murmured, voice gravel rough, laced with the metallic bite of blood on his tongue. His amber eyes, fever-bright, held hers, stripping away the barriers of rogue and king to reveal the raw solitude beneath, a mirror to her own. Forged in the moon's indifferent gaze, we move now before they regroup. The paths from here lead to the Heartwood, where the packs convene under truce. There, we face them all. Elara's heart stuttered, the weight of his words sinking like roots into her soul. The Heartwood, neutral ground, ancient groves where alphas bartered peace or war, but no sanctuary for the cursed. To drag Kai there was to bear him to judgment, his eclipse-born gift a flame drawing every shadow. Yet hiding had only deepened the chasm. Her son's power demanded reckoning, and in Thorn's touch she felt the stirrings of alliance blooming into something deeper. Impossible love, tender as a hidden spring amid thorns, born of shared exile. "And if they come for him?" she whispered, her free hand stroking Kai's hair, the strands damp and tangled like wild vines. "For us." Thorn's grip tightened, pulling her nearer until their foreheads touched, the warmth of his skin a defiant spark against the cavern's chill. Kai nestled between them, his shadows flickering faintly, weaving threads that bound their hands in ephemeral silk. "Then we show them the veil's truth," he said, the words a rumble vibrating through her bones. "Not curse, but bridge. I've lost kin to fear's blade, my own pup. taken by elders who saw shadows as doom. You remind me sacrifice need not end in graves. His confession hung between them, a scar laid bare, and Elara's breath caught, tears pricking her eyes as the pieces aligned. The king's haunted gaze, his choice to run with rogues, all echoes of her flight. The cavern trembled again, a deeper quake this time, dust cascading like mournful rain. From the entrance, the howls swelled into a unified roar, not fragmented pursuit, but the full Silverfang host, elders and warriors converging, their chants weaving binding runes that clawed at the fading quartz light. Shadows recoiled, Kai's power flaring in instinctive protest, coiling around the triad like a living shield. Elara rose, hauling Thorn up with her, his weight leaning into her side, a partnership of equals in the storm. "For him," she growled, her voice steel-wrapped velvet, as partial shift rippled through her, fur armoring her shoulders, claws extending with a familiar ache. They stumbled toward a hidden fissure at the cavern's rear, the veins magic parting stone like flesh, yielding to touch, revealing a tunnel veined with glowing roots that pulsed in rhythm with their steps. Kai clung to Elara's neck, his whispers a litany of "Mama," "Kingman," "Safe," while shadows trailed them like loyal specters. The pursuit thundered behind, claws scraping the quartz in a cacophony of rage, but the tunnel twisted upward, emerging into the Heartwood's embrace, a vast glade where colossal oaks stood sentinel, their leaves whispering prophecies under the climbing sun. The packs had gathered already, banners of fur and claw fluttering in the breeze, alphas from fractured lines circling a central rune circle etched in earth and bone. Eyes turned as they burst from the undergrowth, Thorn bloodied but unbowed, Elara fierce with maternal fire, Kai a small enigma radiating wild power. Gasps rippled through the assembly, the air thickening with sense of suspicion and awe, pine-sharp alertness, the musk of dominance, the faint rot of old grudges. Elder voices rose in condemnation, Silverfangs surging forward, but Thorn stepped into the circle, his roar silencing the glade like thunder over still waters. "Witness the eclipse-born!" he bellowed, Kai at his feet, shadows erupting in a controlled bloom, veils that didn't devour but illuminated, revealing hidden truths, alliances forged in secret, betrayals long buried. Elara stood beside him, her own power awakening fully, shadows merging with her son's in a tapestry that bound foes and friends alike, forcing visions of unity amid division. The climax shattered like fragile ice. Silverfang alphas lunged, claws raking air, but the veil ensnared them, not in death, but revelation, stripping illusions to expose the fear rotting their packs. Thorn fought at her side, his wounds reopening in sprays of blood, a sacrifice that weakened him, even as it strengthened their stand. Elara lost a piece of herself then, the last veil of isolation. Torn away as a claw grazed her chest, drawing blood that mingled with thorns on the sacred earth. In that pain, she discovered her core. Not Beta Shadow, but Queen of Veils, power born of love's unyielding forge. The packs faltered, elders crumbling under the weight of truths unveiled, Silverfangs fracturing as rogues claimed their own. Thorn staggered, collapsing into her arms, Kai's shadows knitting their wounds in luminous threads. As the sun crested fully, bathing the glade in golden warmth, Elara met Thorn's gaze, a look etched with scars and promise, their hands entwined over the boy's sleeping form. The howls faded to murmurs of uneasy peace, destiny's noose loosening into a path of rebirth. In the Heartwood's hush, amid the oak's ancient watch, they rose as one, family from exile's ashes, shadows yielding to dawn's tender light.